The mastodons were swept elsewhere as Valalard watched them climb out onto the grass. He looked at them, surprised that they had won without even having to fight. Lloyd knelt next to him, watching as well, and said there would be plenty for them to eat here, so they should be happy. Valalard asked him if he had really planned to use the canal like this when he first told them to dig it out. Lloyd told him no, but that he had thought it might come in useful. Valalard thought back to all their battles before. They had always lost at least 5 men, and each time he had been the one to inform their families. Every time they lost a man, they spoke of valour and honour. But in their hearts they knew that none of it mattered to those who had been left behind. Later, the cavalry celebrated their victory. Laughter carried through the camp, and one soldier loudly reminded another that he was still waiting for his invitation to his wedding. Valalard watched his men as they celebrated, letting the moment linger before turning his attention to Lloyd. Lloyd was speaking quietly with Javier, warning him that more waves would come and that each one would be worse than the last. Lloyd grinned and asked Javier if he had any idea what he was planning next. Javier answered that, knowing Lloyd, it would probably be a plan that required the least amount of effort to stop the monster invasions at their source. Lloyd confirmed that he was right. At that moment, Valalard stepped forward and told Lloyd that they wished to help as well. Lloyd asked if they were not supposed to be returning to the capital. Valalard explained that he intended to send a letter to the Queen, asking for her permission to remain behind. He told Lloyd that today, for the first time in his life, he had witnessed a complete victory. As he spoke, he admitted that he now understood how incompetent a leader he had been until now. With that, Valalard knelt before Lloyd and asked to be allowed to stay and learn from his wisdom. One by one, the rest of the cavalry followed, kneeling behind their commander. Lloyd let the silence sit for a moment before answering. Then he told Valalard that he had been planning to ask him to stay anyway. He grinned and added that he would need their help for what came next. Back at the manor, Lloyd, Javier, Valalard, and Lloyd's parents sat around the table, discussing what their next move should be. After listening for a moment, Lloyd turned to Arcos and asked if he remembered their old projects involving the waterways from Lake Capua. Arcos gave a slow nod. Lloyd continued, explaining that the lake was said to be home to a legendary beast, King Stormer, which slept deep beneath its waters. Arcos immediately pointed out that Lloyd himself had assured them the construction of the waterworks would not disturb the creature, and that they had moved forward based on that promise. Lloyd acknowledged that this was true, then he added calmly that he now intended to awaken it. Arcos reacted at once, angrily stating his objection, and Lloyd's mother voiced her agreement with him. Before the argument could escalate, Valalard raised his hand and declared that he supported Lloyd's plan. Javier sided with Lloyd as well, bluntly telling Arcos to give up. Once Lloyd set his mind on something, he was not the type to listen. Lloyd glanced at Javier and told him that he was a smart man. Then, without hesitation, Lloyd sprang to his feet and threw his arms into the air, declaring that the vote was over and that construction would begin immediately. Arcos continued to protest, but his words fell on deaf ears. Lloyd and his engineering corps made their way toward the lake. As they walked, Javier finally asked if Lloyd truly intended to wake King Stormer. Then he asked how Lloyd planned to control something like that. Lloyd answered plainly that he could not. He was not a mage. Instead, he explained that he had researched the creature's legends, combing through old books in search of anything useful. What he found described a beast so massive it was said to rival a mountain, yet despite its size, there were no records of it attacking humans. According to the same legends, the creature had created the lake itself by building a massive dam. If its habitat was ever damaged, it would release a deafening shriek before immediately beginning repairs. As Lloyd spoke, his expression twisted. He told Javier that he intended to destroy the creature's home again and again, and that each time it roared, the sound would drive away any monsters that dared approach their borders. He called the plan Operation Guard Dog. Javier stared at him, realizing that Lloyd was calmly proposing to torment this creature indefinitely. He found himself wondering if even Satan would devise something like that. He asked what would happen if Lloyd was wrong and the creature chose to attack instead. Lloyd answered casually, as if the outcome were obvious. Javier blinked when Lloyd explained that his knight would defeat it. Then Lloyd added that if it came to that, he would simply make him shriek into the wilderness instead. Javier studied him, his eyes narrowing, and wondered if Lloyd truly thought of him as a dog. Now at the lake, they stood overlooking the still water. Lloyd activated his survey skill, his gaze sweeping across the mountains that surrounded the lake as unseen data filled his vision. He searched for the safest point to breach, one that would crack the banks without flooding the estate below. As he worked, Lloyd moved his fingers through the air, adjusting projections and running simulations to test which section would give way cleanly. From a distance, Javier and Valelard watched Lloyd's hands trace strange, deliberate patterns. Unable to see the screen, only he could. Javier leaned toward Valelard and told him that it might look strange, but not to worry. This was normal. Valelard continued to watch in awe and replied that Lloyd's strange methods only added to his genius. Beside him, Javier sighed. Deep beneath the surface of the lake, the monster sensed their presence above. It thought that it had forgiven those pesky humans once before for destroying its home, but if they dared disturb it again, it would kill them all. Later, Lloyd made his way through town when he heard someone giggling like a child. He glanced over and saw Bayan rolling across the ground, laughing as he played with a group of mastodon pups. Noticing Lloyd's stare, Bayan quickly composed himself. He stood up, brushed himself off, and greeted him. He admitted that he had been meaning to ask Lloyd something. Looking back at the small mastodons, Bayan explained that they had all been separated from their mothers during the stampede. After a brief pause, he asked for permission to raise them himself. Lloyd warned him that they could become dangerous once they were fully grown. Bayan replied plainly that they would not. Lloyd asked how he could be so sure. Bayan answered that it was because they were adorable, his expression completely serious. Lloyd studied him, his eyes narrowing slightly. He let out a breath and said that raising animals was not easy and that it could be extremely challenging. Bayan dismissed the concern, and when Lloyd asked again how he knew, Bayan repeated his answer. Once again, it was because they were adorable. Lloyd stared at him for a moment longer, then turned away and told him to do as he pleased. Behind him, Bayan immediately dropped back into the grass, laughing as he rolled around with the pups once more. As Lloyd walked on, he thought that Bayan would likely do a good job with them, and that perhaps they might even prove useful. Later, the leader of the orcs informed Lloyd that they would need to return home. Their village, he warned, might be the next to be struck by the spreading monster attacks. Lloyd felt a pang of regret at losing them, but he understood the necessity. He called over Officer Gregg and instructed him to take 5 men and ride alongside the Sand and Steel tribe. If there was any trouble at all, Lloyd told him, he was to bring word back immediately. As they prepared to depart, Lloyd reflected that he could not afford to lose allies as strong as them. Protecting them was not optional. Not long after, Valelard approached and informed Lloyd that all preparations had been completed. Lloyd's lips curled into a grin. Now it was time. He raised his voice and called out to the men, telling them that today they would awaken an ancient beast. He told them that no one else in the world could accomplish what they were about to do. Then he shouted, demanding to know who among them had the strength to carve into mountains and dig them apart. Lloyd spread his arms wide as the men lifted their shovels high, their voices rising together as they shouted, "The White Cavalry!" He clasped his hands together and raised them above his head, asking if they believed in the power of the almighty shovel, his tone carrying like that of a preacher delivering a sermon. In response, they raised their arms as one, hands pressed together in mock prayer, some with tears in their eyes shouting that they believed. Lloyd turned toward the lake, and the march began. As they followed him forward, the chant echoed again and again. The shovel conquers all. From the rear, Javier watched the spectacle unfold and could not help but pity the white cavalry. Through the use of Lloyd's meticulous calculations, the terrain was altered so that the banks of the lake would fracture without triggering a flood. Javier took his position at a distance and shouted over to Lloyd that he was ready. Lloyd called back, asking if he could see the marked point. Javier confirmed that he could. At Lloyd's signal, he struck. Javier drove his sword into the mountainside and released a mana blast, tearing away a section of rock and sending debris crashing into the lake. The men immediately dropped to the ground, taking cover as they waited for the monster to respond. A deep, low rumble spread through the lake as something massive began to stir beneath the surface. Moments later, the water split apart as a shadow surged upward. The small island at the centre of the lake cracked in two as King Stormer rose from the depths. All eyes fixed on the scene, unease spreading through the ranks. Then the creature fully emerged from the water. It was a massive beaver. As it surfaced, it let out a loud cry. "Bibiong!" Lloyd stared up at it, his eyes narrowing, while the rest of the men could only watch in stunned silence at the sight of the enormous, yet strangely adorable creature. Almost immediately, Lloyd realised that he understood everything the beaver was shouting, just as he had with Pudong and the others. For a brief moment, he wondered if this creature might be a summon as well. He set the thought aside, focusing instead on what mattered most. Beavers were obsessed with dams, and surely this one would repair the lake. The beaver slowly turned its head toward Lloyd and spoke, telling him that it could smell him from where he stood. Did he really think it wouldn't notice? It scowled at him, demanding to know if he believed it would simply repair the dam and return to sleep afterward. Lloyd's expression fell at once. This was not the reaction he had expected. The beaver continued, declaring that it would wipe them out completely and put an end to their tricks once and for all. Lloyd knew immediately that this was bad. He had completely misread the situation. Nearby, Valalard crawled over and asked Lloyd what they should do. Lloyd's face was tight with worry as Valalard told him to stop making that expression, adding that it was making him uncomfortable. Without warning, the beaver began hurling massive waves of water toward the shore. The lake's edge flooded as the surge washed some of the men away. Javier burst from the water, sword already in hand, and charged the monster, releasing a mana blast as he advanced. The beaver struck the attack aside effortlessly, as if it were nothing. Javier drew his aura sword and attacked again, lunging toward the creature. Now safely back on dry land, Lloyd shouted for Javier to stop. He told him that he had a plan. As he watched the chaos unfold, Lloyd thought that if this creature truly was a summon, then his plan might still work. Javier kept the beaver engaged, striking and retreating to hold its attention while Lloyd circled around behind it. Lloyd slipped through the water with only his eyes and nose breaking the surface. Just like that, he thought. Keep it distracted. The creature suddenly shifted its head as if it had sensed something. Lloyd immediately dove beneath the surface, forcing himself to stay still as he disappeared from view. He reminded himself to be careful as he held his breath beneath the water. Above, Javier continued to harass the beaver with controlled mana blasts as Lloyd drew closer. At the same time, Javier restrained himself. He could not afford to use his stronger attacks, not if there was a chance he might seriously wound it. He wondered how long he could keep the monster focused on him alone. After a moment, Javier grit his teeth and shouted as loudly as he could. "Bibiong!" The beaver snapped its attention toward him, its eyes lowering as its expression twisted in visible irritation. It protested, stuttering in embarrassment, as it explained that it was not Javier's mother, and that it was male. Javier, not understanding a single word, quietly celebrated to himself. It had worked. Encouraged, he began shouting "Bibiong" again and again, The beaver grew more agitated by the second, demanding to know why Javier kept calling him ugly. Javier simply kept shouting, completely unaware of what he was actually saying as the creature grew angrier. Distracted by Javier's relentless attacks, the beaver failed to notice Lloyd climbing up onto its head. Only when Lloyd shifted his footing did the creature realise he was there. It thrashed wildly, swatting at him with its paws, but its short limbs could not reach far enough. Lloyd leapt from the top of its head, landing just in front of its face. As he moved, he threw something forward and shouted for it to eat this. A small blue seed flew straight into the beaver's open mouth. Lloyd clenched his fist in quiet celebration. He had hit his mark. Almost immediately, the beaver began to shrink. Its massive form rapidly reduced in size as it stumbled forward, wading out of the lake and onto the bank. Confused, it looked around, wondering why the world had suddenly become so large. Lloyd slipped in behind it and scooped it up, laughing as he said, "Gotcha." The beaver struggled furiously in his grasp, then lashed out with its tail, smacking Lloyd across the face and breaking free. It bolted, and Lloyd shouted for the men to catch it. He called out to his helpers, and they sprang from his pocket at once, racing after the fleeing creature. Podong caught up first and jumped directly in its path. The beaver punched him square in the face. Podong froze for a moment, then wiped his cheek, his expression darkening. He answered with a punch of his own, striking the beaver in the face. The two began slapping at each other in a chaotic exchange until Hamang joined in, leaping toward the beaver from behind. The beaver twisted aside at the last moment, and Hamang crashed straight into Podong instead. Taking advantage of the confusion, the beaver broke away once again. Lloyd stepped directly into its path, blocking its escape, and told it that it would not get away. Bangle dropped down in front of the beaver. The creature stopped instantly, staring at Bangle, utterly captivated. It was love at first sight. The beaver stared at Bangle, and Lloyd noticed a faint blush spreading across its face. Seeing the change, Lloyd knelt down in front of it and asked if it felt like talking now. The beaver brushed its fur back, trying to compose itself in front of Bangle, then told Lloyd that he was a gentleman. If Lloyd wished to talk, it said, then it would listen. Lloyd grinned as he realised that he already had the creature in the palm of his hand. Later, back at the manor, they sat down with the beaver as it asked Lloyd what he wanted from it. Lloyd told him that it was simple. Once in the morning and once in the evening, all it had to do was shout "Bibiong" as loudly as it could at the lake. The beaver crossed its arms and told Lloyd that if they were going to make a deal, then Lloyd would have to offer something in return. Lloyd rubbed the back of his head, feigning innocence, and said that he did not have anything to offer. Then he added that if the beaver did what he asked, everyone would be happy, including Bangle. He turned toward Bangle with a wide, unsettling smile and asked if she would be happy. Bangle smiled and agreed. The beaver was caught completely off guard by her smile, then nodded immediately and agreed to the deal. Lloyd thought to himself that he had the beaver trapped. It would do whatever he asked for Bangle's favour, even though she had absolutely no interest in him. He would remain a bachelor forever. Lloyd's smile slowly faded, as he realised that they would likely share the same fate. He suddenly scooped the beaver up in his hands, holding it close as it stiffened, silently wondering what Lloyd's problem was. Lloyd then asked the beaver if he could call it Bibiong from now on. The beaver crossed its arms and stuttered out a reluctant agreement, saying that he supposed it was fine. Before anything else could be said, the door burst open. Greg rushed into the room, shouting Lloyd's name. He spoke frantically, telling Lloyd that the orcs were under attack and that they needed reinforcements immediately. They were being assaulted by a horde of megalania. Elsewhere, the orcs were fighting for their lives as their village came under attack. Their strongest warrior, their leader, leapt forward and brought his club crashing down onto one of the massive beasts. To his surprise, The blow barely made it flinch. The monster answered immediately, swinging its tail and striking him head-on, sending him flying through the air before he slammed into the ground. He forced himself back up, looked toward the monsters, and shouted that they would never back down from a fight. Back at the manor, Lloyd gave Greg the order to send the white cavalry to the town's entrance. Greg protested at once, saying that it would be too late. Lloyd told him there was a way to get there in time, his gaze shifting toward Bibiong. Moments later, Lloyd and Javier rushed toward the meeting point with Bibiong, and Javier asked what the plan was. Lloyd told him that this was their chance to counter the monster domino once and for all, a wild grin spreading across his face. As they moved through town, Lloyd handed Bibiong a red seed. The effect was immediate. Bibiong's body swelled rapidly, growing massive as villagers stopped and stared, mouths hanging open in disbelief. Lloyd and Javier leapt onto his back, and with a powerful jump, Bibiong launched himself over the village, soaring toward the entrance. Later, they made their way toward the orc village, now carrying the white cavalry with them as well. Bibiong leapt over the treetops, covering vast distances in seconds as they closed in on the battlefield. At the moment, the orcs were bracing themselves against the advancing megalania when something enormous crashed down in front of them and sent a cloud of dust into the air. As the dust began to settle, Bibiong stood towering over the monsters. Lloyd stood atop his head and addressed them directly. He fixed the megalania with a hard glare and warned them to carry a message back with them. There was no prey for monsters in the west. Then his gaze sharpened as he told them that here they were the prey. The monsters flinched at his words. Before they could react, Bibiong swung his paw, striking them with overwhelming force and sending them flying far into the distance. When it was over, Bibiong shrank back down to his smaller size. Bangle approached him at once, smiling as she praised him, and Bibiong immediately blushed. Valilard stepped forward and asked Lloyd why he had brought them along, saying that it seemed as though they had not been needed. Lloyd laughed and replied that he had not brought his precious engineering corps for nothing. He told them that there was important work to be done. The leader of the Sand and Steel tribe approached next. Lloyd asked if he was all right. The orc lowered his head before Lloyd and told him that they were no longer blood brothers. Lloyd asked what he meant, confused. After taking a deep breath, the orc bowed deeply and declared that the Sand and Steel tribe pledged their loyalty to the Frontera clan. One by one, the rest of the tribe followed behind him, bowing as well. Lloyd smiled and said that the timing was perfect. Then he declared that they would now begin the third project of Operation Save the Sand and Steel tribe.